Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the Women in Medicine Summit, a transformational CME conference happening September 13th to 14th at the Drake Hotel in Chicago. Engage in leadership programming, learn negotiation skills, receive on-site coaching and mentoring, and see who will win this year's I Stand With Her awards. This year, we're excited to offer unique programming that includes a special session on how using improv comedy can bring fun back into medicine. We also have financial sessions tailored to help you navigate the complexities of personal and professional finances. Discover ways to advance into leadership roles, combat burnout, and either reignite your love for your current role or find joy in a new career path. Don't forget our Friday evening gala, a highlight this year you definitely won't want to miss. Register now at womeninmedicinesummit.org and be part of the movement that is shaping the future of healthcare. Join us to network, learn, and celebrate the power of women in medicine.
Welcome to the Revitalizing Doctor podcast. We interview trailblazers in medicine that embody the Revitalize Women vision to empower women to innovate and influence medicine, to value authenticity, respect, and work-life harmony. We recognize the challenges in medicine, and we're committed to providing coaching-informed strategies to help you go from surviving to thriving. I have such a wonderful treat for all of our listeners today. I have the Dr. Cheryl Martin from Australia with me, esteemed guest of the podcast and a Frentor. A Frentor is a word for a friend and a mentor. And I am so blessed with several Frentors in my life. The quick backstory on me and Cheryl is we became friends on Twitter. We had a few overlaps. Thank you. Shout out to Dr. Dan Dorcas from the Emergency Mind. Cheryl had been on his podcast and vice versa. And Cheryl knows Cherie Johnson, also prior guest on the podcast. And Cheryl's just one of those people that, like, once you meet, we just have this soul connection that we see things very similarly, the problems in healthcare, and we both have this crazy energy. And when we get together, we can't stop talking. I'm just so happy you're here. Welcome, Cheryl.
Oh, what an introduction. The honor is all mine to be here. And I think just as you're speaking there, I was reflecting on that journey, listening to you. I remember quite a few walks in the middle of pandemic restrictions with a podcast on, listening to you and Dan, and then getting finally the opportunity to actually meet you and do some extreme friending last year in California. Really, grateful to have the opportunity to do that. And I agree that there's so much synergy. I learn a lot from you, and I really love that term Frentor. And I think if you can have a network of those people in your life who are friends and mentors who raise your game, then is very important. And for me, I think it's become really essential. So thank you for being part of that.
Yeah. One last comment on the Frentor thing. We're trying to bring clarity to the terms like mentor and sponsor. The reason I think Frentor matters, and especially for women, is I think there are things that you don't want to share with some mentors. Some mentors, it's very professional and there's a formality, and there's things that happen in your life that you may not want to share with everybody. But a Frentor is somebody you can let behind the curtain and say, this is what's actually going on in my life. And it's a Frentor is like you, also a doctor. Then we can connect on like, this is what's happening in my life. This is what needs to happen in my career, and the insight that can happen with that. So I would say if you don't have a Frentor in your life, start seeking them out. The synergy, the peer coaching that we've done for each other. This is how I'm working on my podcast. This is what I'm going through. But let's just jump into your 2023. You have been one busy girl.
I don't think quite as busy as you, but like we've said, it's felt like a huge year.
Yeah. I mean, you started an MBA.
I did. I said to you, I think my kind of highlights for this year on reflection have been really managing to meet in person so many people that I had really only virtual connections with and to previously. And I know I'm not alone. I mean, I think we spent most of 21 and 22, but it was really powerful to see how lots of connections really still happened, not just locally, but globally. And I feel really lucky to have met so many people that I think it's been a bit embarrassing actually to meet people and then forget that I haven't actually met them in person. I don't know if you know Joanna Sinclair. She's an anaesthetist in New Zealand. We've done a lot of work collaboratively in the clinician wellbeing space. And I think she was one of the last person I actually got to meet in person. But by the time we did, it was just so natural. She just sat down and I forgot that we hadn't actually met. I think I felt when I came to visit you a bit like that. I felt like we kind of knew each other, which actually says a lot about virtual platform, that it actually can be a powerful tool for connection and meaningful connection.
I so agree. I love the in-person. I mean, looking back 2 years ago, I would have never expected that I would have such a close friend way down in Australia. I haven't even been to your country, which is mind blowing. And we're going to correct that soon.
Oh, definitely.
2024 or 25. And now I have like several friends. You know, it was funny. I don't know if I shared this with you. I got my stats for the pod and the top city, San Diego, for downloads. The second city, you want to guess?
Melbourne.
Yeah,
nice.
Melbourne. And then Auckland was pretty close on that list too. And so that's what the power of this friendship is, that we're able to connect across huge distances.
It makes the world seem a much smaller place.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned on my podcast earlier that a lot of the challenges we're facing may be slightly different, but there's a lot of similarities, particularly in healthcare. And I think it's important to realize that we spend a lot of time just looking down, but being able to look up and across is important. I think on that, my reason for doing the MBA was I actually wanted to look up and across. I do feel that we sometimes need to look outside ourselves to think differently. And I think this year has been about challenging myself to think differently and to learn from excellence elsewhere. And I think also to put myself in a position where I felt very much like a beginner. And I will say that has been challenging. Certainly the ego does rebel a little bit, but I think that has been my kind of MBA experience. I've thought about it for a couple of years now, and I picked a program that I think has worked very well for me. It's an executive MBA. It's 18-month program. It feels a bit like boot camp style, but we do residential blocks all 9 days where I go and I live in the business school and I eat and sleep and connect and study and work with a group of peers. And there's a lot of group work involved in that. And they're a really incredible group. We are very diverse across industry, profession, culture, and not interestingly, the group that I see represented in the very senior levels of leadership is the group I'd like to see represented. So I think the school have done a very good job in that respect. And it's also global. So I'm going to have a global experience. So we went to India and next year I'll be in Europe and in California again, which I'm very excited about. An excuse to come and see you. I suppose the only other thing on the kind of opportunities and challenges of that, I've found that although I'm not doing a healthcare MBA, a lot of the work I've been able to make relevant to my environment. And it's interesting when you're maybe doing a group project, and a lot of my colleagues at business school have allowed me to indulge my passion and topics at times. You have this initial phase of real struggle trying to communicate your challenges in your industry to another group. And I kind of started to enjoy that struggle phase to really get clear on how I articulate a message and the problems. But then after that, to sit back and then watch people who think differently and approach things in different ways contribute and say, well, have you thought about this? And what about this? And you build something much better. I think the other thing that I found very useful in the group work has been working with people who think very differently to me and who approach things very differently. And again, I think that is very challenging. I was thinking about a project we did quite recently, and I mentioned it to you. It was an accounting project. And yeah, I haven't really relished or thrived in accounting and finance this year, unfortunately. But this was a really great project on a return of investment on an intangible. And my group allowed me to indulge my passion for clinician wellbeing and pick a wellbeing intangible that's close to both of our hearts on clinician wellbeing, leadership coaching, intervention, really selling that as investing in not only our clinicians, but also our patients and our whole organization. And I sat down with my group and one of my colleagues, and we were working quite closely on it. I'm admittedly very right-brained, dominant, if you want to put labels on it. I'm quite qualitative emergency physician with a very short attention span. And I was working with my wonderful colleague who is very left brain, dominant engineer with a real need and attention to detail. If you can imagine those first couple of sessions, we really pushed each other's buttons and it was pretty uncomfortable and very frustrating. And then eventually we had to kind of work through that struggle, and I've started to enjoy that process. And we've ended up bonding, having initially really kind of annoyed each other. We bonded through the process, and we both agree, I think, that we created something that neither of us would have been able to do as individuals. I think that kind of speaks to how we interact in teams more broadly. And the idea that if you try to really create space for creativity, and we've talked about psychological safety so many times, it's actually pretty messy to do that. It's not about being nice and fluffy. You've actually got to dig into the hard conversations.
I love it. And that ties into one of my favorite episodes of the year with you. It's with Amy Edmondson on psychological safety, which obviously is a huge interest of mine as a simulationist. So I would highly encourage the listeners to hop onto your pod and listen to that episode with Amy on psychological safety. I want to be a bit granular for a minute, because the question of doing an MBA comes up for a lot of doctors. And you and I touched on it in the last episode that doctors are very good at getting degrees and merit badges. Could you walk somebody through the decision to get an MBA?
It's interesting that you said it's a common question for doctors, because I wonder if that is more a US perspective, because I don't think it's such a common pathway at the moment. Certainly that might change here in Australia and maybe in the UK. And it's interesting, I went on Amandeep Hansara has the Creative Careers in Medicine platform a couple of years ago, and I knew a few emergency physicians with MBAs and I had spoken to them in the past. It's something that's kind of been at the back of my mind. And I remember going on this platform, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, and really saying, oh, look, I'm thinking about doing this. I just wonder if anybody has any advice, and has anybody done this? And I kind of got no replies or response. And there's 20-odd thousand people on that platform now. And usually it's quite engaged conversation. I felt like I got nothing. And, I did reach out to a couple of people. And I remember one clinician saying, kind of looking at me, why would you want to do that? So I didn't feel that that this was a really common thing to want to do. I picked a few referees who were colleagues who kind of got it. I'm not sure if I can share or speak to the US experience. There's clearly a lot of business schools in the US. Where to go with that now? I did a bit of homework. I've said it's not common, but I now can think of probably 7 emergency physicians I know with MBAs, and all have spoke very highly of their experiences. And I think it was more that opportunity to connect with people outside healthcare and to think and learn in a different way. When would I have that unique opportunity to spend that time? I hear what you're saying about collecting bits of paper and collecting letters. I do think we are quite good at doing that. Don't know if I'd necessarily think that's a good idea to embark on an MBA. A bit like a PhD or anything. These things are very involved and they do take a part of you.
Amen to that.
and they're expensive.
Yeah.
They are very expensive. I think we spoke earlier about what are you saying no to if you say yes to this? And I consider it an investment in myself and hopefully in my colleagues in my profession, but it's not a decision to be taken lightly. You really have to carve the space for it. There are scholarships available and some people are funded to do an MBA. I am self-funding my MBA. I did apply for a couple of scholarships and I got a lot of rejections. So, I think that's all the things that you need to take into mind and then decide how you're actually going to study. I'm doing a senior executive MBA. It's global. I really wanted a global experience. And in my cohort, so I'm 44 now, and I am just below the mean for our age group. So we've got a wide variety of, as I said, it's a very diverse group anyway, but ranging from their mid-30s up to late 50s. As I say, there was a few other courses that I looked at, but I think for me, this was the best one. But you might want to do it online. You might want to do it part-time. You might want to do an MBA or an MBA. There are so many different options.
Yeah. And maybe the question, I kind of use a coaching question, is it's always helpful to think about what's the end. So if somebody wants an MBA, why? So Cheryl, what do you have planned for this MBA?
I don't know exactly what this will look like, but I feel that I'm learning skills and developing skills that I really was lacking. And maybe part of it is a credibility thing. I will admit that. But I did feel that I needed a bigger toolkit and a broader lens. And I've probably mentioned on my podcast a couple of times a lot of the work that we've been doing. And we've had a lot of momentum this year has been really investing in physician executive roles to really think about clinicians and the well-being of clinicians as part of the whole and how that really enables patient care and the wider picture of really high-performing organizations in healthcare. And I feel that this is still a relatively new area. I mean, we have spoken, we had Tate Shanafelt come over from Stanford this year for our Wellbeing Summit. That was a really big deal. My colleagues at Beamtree and Health Roundtable, and there's quite a growing group of us, but we don't have many of these roles as yet. There's only, so Bethan was our first Chief Wellness Officer a couple of years ago. We have Joanna. We've got a couple, and I think ACT have just advertised a role. And I feel that still quite new ground here. And I think a part of that, if you're going to do something a bit different, and this is kind of leading change and innovation, then I really wanted to learn from outside healthcare too. So far, that hasn't disappointed. And what that will look like for me in the end, I'm still not sure.
And that's a beautiful answer. That's like me with my master's in health professions education. I knew I wanted it, and I wanted the community, the connections, the diversity of thought that came with it. What I actually do with it at the end of the day, I may do the same things that I'm doing now. When you reflect on your MBA, I've already granted you the degree.
Well, we're 50% through as of yesterday. So it was really touch and go, I have to say, for accounting too and finance too. One of my goals for accounting, apparently, or one of my objectives, is to have a meaningful conversation with my accountant. So my dad is an accountant, as is my brother, and they find this hysterical that maybe they will have a meaningful conversation with me at the end of this program.
I love it. Oh gosh. Yeah, that was like me in quantitative analysis. It was like holding my breath the entire course. What's been your biggest aha moment of the MBA program that, that you're looking back into the healthcare world, or you're still working some shifts, you're still in the healthcare mix? What's been like, ooh, I'm excited about this, or this is a new insight that I think I can bring to my healthcare side?
I think what I've most appreciated is having other people look in and seeing what I'm seeing through their eyes. I think it was interesting to go and present to our group on a leadership coaching intervention, for example, for senior work unit, that critical work unit leadership, your heads of department. And we know those roles are critical. Your well-being at work is very closely related to the leadership capability of your immediate manager. And I think we have very good clinical and technical skills in medicine. That's what we're trained to do. We have excellent simulation directors to help us in that. And I think we've got much better at CRM and human factors over time. But maybe those executive leadership skills in terms of managing people, I don't think that those are necessarily part of our training. And many of us find ourselves in these roles just by virtue of, I suppose, progressing in our career and feel poorly supported in those roles as well, I will add. And so when I suggested that this is what I was going to do as the pitch, I saw a lot of very confused faces. And they were like, well, you mean this isn't just what you do? You don't do this normally? That's not part of it? Because that is something that just happens as part of their training as senior leaders. There's been a few examples of that. The other thing, maybe not related to healthcare, but the power of having that network of support. I feel like I have a lot of people that have my back. And I think our goal as a group is really, there's this lovely quote, and again, I don't know who initially coined it, but really our aim, or if I have an aspiration for us as a group, is that we would be a voice for each other in rooms that we're not in. So really being able to support each other in that way. And I think everybody has found that. Look, I think the other thing I will add is that it's actually been one of the richest, most immersive learning experiences of my life, which I think I find interesting at having gone through medicine and gone through a lot of the training and exams and things that we have over many decades. I feel like this is a real gift to myself. This is the one I'm paying for, and it feels like a gift.
Yeah. I mean, looking back, I mean, I am very happy that I went to medical school, and I loved medical school. I had a great school and made some great friendships, but it is a very rigid experience, at least when I went through a lot of memorization, and it's refreshing when you do a master's. It's typically none of my programming was really memorization. I would imagine an MBA, there's very few things they're asking you to memorize. It's all about more of that analytical, complex thinking, that there's not a right answer. There's a series of things. And that's very stimulating at this phase of our careers.
Yeah. And I think that sometimes seeing things through different lenses, you certainly get more of the aerial view, but I actually think it can make it more challenging when you can see the layers of complexity and all the different angles. So that, those are the bigger conversations. And I'm looking forward to the second half of our MBA, because I think that the more you've kind of built the frameworks, the more you get into those more challenging and really interesting conversations. So I think that's hopefully where this will go. I'm looking at next module, and it's all good stuff. So there's human and social capital, operations, strategy. It's all of the things that get me very excited. I've had a couple of professors two of my favorite subjects have been ethical leadership, managerial judgment. And so Jill Klein teaches managerial judgment, and she actually works for the medical school, and she's done some work for ASIM. So that's been really interesting. And her partner, Andrew, teaches ethical leadership. And I felt like, I think you would have enjoyed a lot of those topics. We did a lot on bias and heuristics. And so I do think that the other thing to say is I felt a bit of an imposter and felt quite thick at times this year. I have actually looked around a room for the first time in a long time and thought, everybody else gets this but me, which is very humbling. But I think in those classes, you remember that we actually have a lot to add and contribute to, and that I think people can actually learn from our experience too. So that's been powerful to remember that as well as a clinician.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Are you a physician mom with school-aged children feeling utterly exhausted? My friend Dr. Sheeta Shaffi invites you to take a little time this summer to join her in a small, intimate group for meaningful conversations. Dr. Shaffi is an emergency physician, coach, and mom to 8-year-old twins. She understands firsthand what you're going through. This isn't a pizza party or a yoga class. You'll meet for 2 one-hour sessions twice a month starting in July to help you move out of exhaustion, let go of mom guilt, and live a life you're not only proud of, but can truly enjoy. Connect with her on LinkedIn or Instagram at Sheeta Shafee to learn more. Sheeta is spelled Shideh, and Shafee is spelled Shafie. You can also check the show notes for a link so you can connect with her there as well.
I love that. I'm so excited for everything that you're doing, along with doing your MBA, which I'm sure by all intents and purposes actually is a full-time job. You're still doing some clinical shifts. And of course, you're the podcast extraordinaire. So looking at your other roles as emergency doc and podcast, what would you say was your top leadership insight for 2023?
And going back to what we said earlier about starting with self, leading self, and starting from that place before you can lead others in team. All the work that I'm going to ask you if you agree, but I think that both of us have been through a period of probably personal evolution. And it was interesting. And just going back to the MBA, we revisited again that basic work on values in our first leadership and change module. And I think now that's the 7th iteration of visiting this material, but building on it each time. And I think I've had to pepper a lot of that work through many of the subsequent modules. And it's good to know that you have done a bit of this and that you're continuing to build on it, and that it does. I think we spoke about the idea of it being a personal compass. And I think that has helped me. I now have more of an idea of what I need to stay well and thriving and able to keep pushing boundaries and challenging myself. So I think that's important before you think about how you actually are going to support and lead a team, because you can't actually do that work if you're not able to support yourself. And I think that's the other thing just about leadership roles generally. And I think these are really hard roles. Those senior leadership roles in healthcare, those work unit leadership roles, I think they're poorly supported, and I think people feel poorly supported. And we often have a feeling that many of these jobs that I see are more than one job. And we often set people up for failure because we're not actually providing the necessary supports and environment and resources to help them do their work well. That has been something I've always kind of known, but I think like one of my missions is how do we improve this? How do we redesign jobs if necessary? And how do we support people in these important roles?
I love that. I 100% agree. You can't lead others until you can lead yourself. And I think that's powerful. We're both huge fans of Cherie Johnson, and that's why her work is so important. We know healthcare needs to change. One of my big insights for 2023 was Dr. Christina Shenby. There is no white knight coming to rescue us. We've kind of screamed into the void. At least I have. I've complained about everything and how crappy it is. And it's a really sad moment that you recognize that there is nobody coming to fix this. It's quite complex problem set that we have, whether it's Australia or United States. And it's going to require all of us working together, and for us to have the most, I think we're both in this stage where we're trying to up our leadership game because the stakes are huge. And the problems are incredibly complex. They're dilemmas. Problems actually have a solution. Dilemmas don't have a straightforward solution. So we have a series of dilemmas. And so it's the hero's journey that we're on. And then we're not going to be able to get to the end of it without all working together to tackle it.
And I think you're right. And I think it's very easy to get very overwhelmed, but I draw a lot of hope and inspiration from those people that I see who are doing great work in their own sphere of influence and control. And I've just recorded a podcast episode that will release hopefully before Christmas if I get to that later today. It was really great to speak to a team who are doing great things. And I've mentioned their work on a few of the episodes. So I spoke to Dr. George Iskander and his colleagues, Dr. Roberta Dombrava and Dr. Katie McLeod, who are in Perth, so Western Australia. And so George is the Chief Medical Officer and acting EDMS, so Executive Director of Medical Services there. And I met him at the Organizational Wellbeing Summit in September. And so Robbie and Katie are RMO president and registrar lead. So the three of them are a team. They were involved in something called the Junior Medical Officer Manifesto. So 2 years ago, their health network basically had 25% deficit of junior medical staff on the roster. So big hole in the roster, quarter bit unfilled. They were spending about 5 million on locum staff to fill those roles for the doctors. I think that was about the time that he took up office. He is a GP by background from the UK, has had a lot of NHS leadership roles. And so they basically started with a sit down and a cup of coffee conversation with, I think, Robbie and her colleague, and starting to connect and ask the doctors, what do you need? How do we go forward together here? And the answers will not surprise you. None of it really rocket science. We would like part-time and flexible working opportunities. We would like paid overtime. We would like to know that when we sign a contract for the year that we can actually get married next year or take some time out for a major life event. We would like to have our annual leave pretty much approved, bar Christmas and New Year and exam time. And that is pretty much what they did. And they are now at 100% capacity. And their latest AMA, so Australian Medical Officer Training Survey, has them as the employer of choice in the region. They are also looking, so they have junior medical staff representation on the executive team, and you can see talking to the two of them. I think it was actually particularly powerful to listen to Robbie and Katie talk about, even before the survey results came out, it was kind of like the smell of the place. You could just feel that things had shifted. There was something changing here. People were happier. People were pleased to be at work, and you could just feel it. They are now working on a number of other iterations of this. I love that it is an iterative process, and they are learning as they go, and they are talking to each other. That is really powerful. So good leadership, collaborative, values-based leadership, and building a culture, co-creating it, and kind of basic HR 101. Nothing particularly too difficult. And that is not particularly expensive, actually. So that is powerful. There was a few other things that I had to say on that. But I think that the other example is meeting Dr. Chris Turner this year, who's an emergency physician who was on my podcast from Scotland. And he formed the platform Civility Saves Lives. And he came out for the Gathering of Kindness workshop that Professor Catherine Crock runs. Catherine is rather amazing, and her and Lucy Mays together have been running this for a number of years. And it was really great to be part of a panel and part of that whole event, which has really kind of grown wings over the years. But going back to the basics has been powerful. Okay, I'm doing an MBA to get the finance and the ROI around this and invest in X, Y, and Z, but maybe actually you've got to kind of peel it back to what we can control, and actually simple things are very, very powerful here.
Totally agree. That is just such a fantastic message for the audience. And I would also encourage people to recognize the difference between management and leading. There is a difference. There's a lot of managers walking around hospitals. There aren't that many leaders.
When you said earlier on my podcast about your own boss who said, look, I know nothing about this. You're the expert. I've employed you. I'm going to support you, but give you agency and creative license to really develop this program. That's leadership.
That's leadership. That's leadership. If an AI could send a computer generated message to remind somebody, that's a management thing. The leadership is the stuff that involves emotional intelligence and trust and all the good stuff. And I think that's where both of us are at this point, where it's like, that's where the gaps are. Some points during this year, it's like the house of healthcare is on fire, but it's kind of disappointing to understand that like some of it may be a little bit to do with us. And that's a very uncomfortable thing for doctors to hear. But I think we have to be honest that some of these problems we do have to own, or at least start owning how we make some solutions to them.
And I'll admit to a kind of learned helplessness. And I think it's interesting from a patient's point of view, we have a lot of power and agency, but when you talk, and we talk to a lot of doctors and we know that we feel very disempowered and like we have no agency at times in the bigger system.
Yeah, that's such a powerful message that we'll have to dig into more about how we help pull more people out of that learned helplessness. And I know some people are cringing as I say that. I've been there. I 100% will own my learned helplessness. It was at a peak during the pandemic. But let's shift gears. I'm cognizant that I could interview you forever, and this is just so good for my soul. But let's hear some quick hits from the Australian Dr. Cheryl Martin perspective. Do you have any favorite reads for 2023?
Yes, I've had a lot of mandatory reading this year, but I have managed to sneak in some, I'm going to say reading for pleasure, but it is still kind of a little bit of shop. I really mentioned Lucy Mays, who co-founded Gathering of Kindness. She has a book called Beyond the Stethoscope. Oh, it's wonderful. So based on chapters, biographies of some clinicians I know and some that I would like to get to know. I think you and I could both take any of them and put them on a podcast. Lucy's husband's a GP and he contributes. Jeff Toogood, who I've had on my podcast, also contributes. Professor Catherine Kopp, you hear a bit more about her story, leading patient safety in the Royal Children's Hospital. And that is a phenomenal book, which I've enjoyed. And Amy Edmondson, we mentioned, I actually reread The Fearless Organization. So if you haven't read that, just read it. It's so good. And she has a new book out this year called The Right Kind of Wrong, which really is about intelligent failure. And I really like that as a term. And that is a fantastic book. I think it's won a lot of accolades this year. I think FT voted it Read of the Year, and she was voted number one in the Thinkers 50. So,
wow.
Pretty impressive stuff. And I think on that, her other fellow colleague now, actually, I think they're collaborating in a few areas. Linda Hill is another person I've followed, and she has a book called Collective Genius. And she was also up there in the Thinkers 50 as well. So I've not managed much fiction. I do have a few fiction books on my shelf. I might get there, but I've just been given another book to read for my next MBA module, which is actually a fictional take on strategy. So it's called The Goal, but I haven't quite got there yet. So far, it seems actually worth reading. So I'll maybe give you an update on that one.
I love it. Any must watch?
I've not been so good at watching things this year. I did watch, we talked about Ted Lasso. I maybe have watched a couple of documentaries, but there's nothing really coming to mind on the watch apart from Ted at the moment. And maybe, we mentioned the bonus, if you could link Hannah Waddington and the
oh my gosh,
Ted Lasso
so good.
team. I've actually forgotten. It was a charitable event.
It was Hannah Waddington's, I'm blanking on the title, but it was her Christmas special on Apple TV. And many of the Ted Lasso cast members were part of the show. And
I was talking about the music event. So they did a music event for charity as well. So we actually were talking about different things. I don't think
I want to know your thing. We're going to have to sort it out.
I will find a link to it and I will send it to you.
Yay. All right. So watch for that. Any conferences that you'll be at in 2024 that maybe our listeners can connect to if they're...
That's a good question. Can I ask you that as well?
Yes. We'll talk about our conference plans. You go first.
So I am going to attend the Creative Careers in Medicine conference, which is Meet Me in the Mediverse. I'll be speaking at that one as well. This should be a fantastic conference. So that's Amandeep Hansra and the team at Creative Careers in Medicine. They have a great podcast as well, which I love listening to. And so quite a few colleagues will be there, and that will be in March 9th and 10th in Sydney in the Novotel. So that one is great. I'm going to Europe for one of my MBA modules just after that, and then US in the middle of the year. But I did have on my radar, what about yourself?
Let's see. So 2024, the International Simulation and Healthcare Conference is actually in San Diego. So that's very exciting. I love that conference.
When will that be?
It's third week of January. So it's coming right up. It's like a month away. That's a great conference for any simulationists out there. Government Services chapter of the American College is actually also in San Diego. People love having conferences here. I am traveling though. I will go to the American College of Emergency Physician meeting in Las Vegas this year. So I'll be fantastic to have 5,000 emergency physicians descend on Las Vegas. What could go wrong or right? We'll find out. I would love to add an international conference to my portfolio. I don't think it's going to happen in 2024, but I'd like to keep that in mind for future years to really try to go international. I know there's an international SIM conference. There's an international education conference that's on my radar, but I think that's an opportunity that I'd love for our listeners, for us to be sharing. And I want to go to some type of digital healthcare conference, AI, digital. I've got the name of one that I'm eyeing that I need to kind of expand my network.
Fantastic. Well, Amandeep's quite involved in the digital health space as well. And so I think that will have quite a remit at the CCIM conference. I think just on the US trip on non-work related things, I'm really missing my running kind of holidays. I've done a couple now over the years where you go away somewhere and just spend a couple of days just trail running. And I don't know if I'll get to do one of those formally this year, but I do have a good friend who has qualified for Western States. And I'm really hoping that a few of us will be able to go out and support and crew. So if I can make the stars align, I'll be coming to the US a bit early to do that and maybe get a bit of running in as well.
I love that. Well, I know you'll keep me posted on your travels and I can't wait to connect, and hopefully we'll do another Women in Medicine event when you're in town.
Have a conference together one day, Andrea. I don't think either of us have time for that at the moment, but I'm hoping that might happen.
I totally agree. I foresee it in our future. Anything you want to leave the listeners with? How can they connect with you?
So, well, I suppose some exciting news, which is on my menu for this evening. It's been a bit of a slow process for me to really kind of set up a website. I'm fortunate to have the podcast sponsored by the Medical Benevolent Association here in Australia of New South Wales and ACT. And Louise Fallon kindly reached out to me last year, and it's expensive and we spent a lot of money and resources. I know this is our passion project, podcasting, but she's covered some of the platform fees, and that's been a really big help this year. But I did reach out to, so there's a company in the UK about 6 months ago after a shift in Darwin one night. I just sent an email. I have got a couple of these badges that I'd ordered to Badge Master, which are the Hello, My Name Is badges, made famous by Dr. Kate Granger. I mean, she's left a profound legacy there. And these are really powerful tools in healthcare. We often turn up, and particularly in simulation, we often turn up and we don't know each other's names. Patients maybe don't know our names. And so I'd ordered a couple of badges. A couple of my colleagues had ordered badges. I did a LinkedIn post and like 120,000 impressions and 80 people shared it. And so it did get quite a bit of momentum. And so I'd reached out to Casper, who's one of their managers, and I said, well, I wonder if you'd be willing to help support the podcast. And so he has been wonderful and put together a website for me. So we're going to hopefully launch that today, which will be good because it will give me a way to communicate with my listeners, and you'll be able to get the badges as well, but also be able to donate to the Medical Benevolent Association. So all the links will be on there. And there's also a little space for a bit of creative license and writing and blog work. So that is something hopefully I will get a bit more time to do. It's something I've wanted to do for a while. So as you say, there's so much gold that comes from our podcast episodes. I think I'll have to embrace some of the AI tools to really transcribe some of that, because I think these are ideas and expertise and perspectives worth sharing. This is how we all kind of come together. And I think, as you said, with your community it's building community. I just want to thank everyone who's listened and really helped contribute and make both of our podcasts what they are, because I know that's what keeps you and I showing up and doing this.
100%. It is just such a privilege to get to record with people like you, my Frentor.
Thank you, Andrea, for continuing to raise my game. I'm really looking forward to connecting with you again in person.
As a call to action to the listeners, we move so fast all the time. I hope you have a few days off and you can reflect on what 2023 meant to you, what you learned, who you connected with, where you went, and take all that and where are you pointing to in 2024. So get off the rat race, set the treadmill to the height and the rate that you want to be on. Maybe it's not a treadmill. Maybe you need to hop over to an elliptical or a rower.
And for me, trails.
Or the trails.
Off
Yeah.
the treadmill into the trails.
Exactly. Spend some time reflecting. And I think this is a great tradition for us to close out our years together. It's really been one of the most meaningful things that have happened to me this year. So thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks for listening to The Revitalizing Doctor, a project of Revitalize Women Physician Circle. Our mission is to connect women physicians and allies through innovative, value-based coaching methods that align trust, support, accountability, and skill development to ignite the courage and clarity necessary to take bold actions, create change, and thrive. If you're interested in working with us, check out our website at peoplealwayshcc.com/revitalize or email us at revitalizemmm.info@gmail.com. This podcast represents the views of our host and guest. It does not reflect the views of any institution we work for or with.
Hi, it's Dr. Risa E. Lewis, dropping in to tell you about a book that Dr. Adara Landry and I wrote. It's called Microskills, Small Actions, Big Impact. It's a business self-help book coming in 2024 by HarperCollins. Pre-order now. Microskills, Small Actions, Big Impact, wherever you buy your books.